Our action should not proceed from or re-stimulate the fear that some do not deserve to live if they have been complicit in a social order that harms. That was an attitude I saw in far too many of my comrades back in the 60s. I mean, there are a few people who don't deserve to live right now, but they really, you know, just a few of them. If we were power, we could get rid of them, you know, very nicely. So what I'm saying is that we're caught in a kind of contradiction of our own. And we, that is to say, those of us who see ourselves as a progressive force trying to defend or restore democracy, need to avoid the, shall we say, trap in which the contemporary liberal elite, the defenders of neoliberalism, found themselves, the impasse that was created because they also, in some way, subscribe to the belief that there is no other world than that of doer and done to. And they also, in their own personal climb to the top, had to subscribe to that. To step out of this impasse, I believe, and this is really going to be disappointing, requires accepting a social, systemic analysis of the nature of harming that somewhat removes it from individual blame and thus from the do-or-done-to dynamic. By which I don't mean that we could just, you know, rationalize everything and say, you know, it's a system, what can I do? But the point is that unless we understand that there really is a system, and we radically analyze this system, I don't believe that we can recognize the contradictions that exist and nonetheless aim for a democratic society in which the sheep are protected, even though we cannot send the wolves to the guillotine. This would require a form of thirdness, of holding opposites in tension, which needs to be politically and socially adumbrated. How can we analysts help? Well, the political difficulty in stepping out of this impasse has some parallels with the difficulty with which we are clinically familiar in our work with enactments. Just as every enactment has a story, a drama with dissociated elements from the past that inform how each person sees the other, so too in political impasses there are such narrative elements in which, as we have seen and Lincoln pointed out, each side finds a way to make the other the tyrant and themselves the done-to. In other words, the rejection of vulnerability and the refusal to acknowledge the lawful thirdness of our moral codes that protect the weak needs to be countered by something else, something that I think we're familiar with, that I'm going to call the reparative worldview, the view that repair is possible. And I would argue that there is a kind of dissociated side of the fundamentalist worldview, which has actually offered its adherents a way out of the world of sin and judgment, that is, the idea of atonement and forgiveness. So while whites who have been manipulated have had great difficulty admitting the harm that blacks suffered without imagining they'll be blamed and deserve retaliatory deprivation or even annihilation, I think it is possible to advance a vision that proposes not only acknowledgement and reparation, but also reconciliation and unity around common goals that would allow us to step out of the retaliatory cycle in which each side makes the other psychologically unsafe. The idea of reparation as a third might psychologically and strategically counter the enmity and competition that uses the pronouncement "all lives matter" to perversely undercut rather than recognize the truth that black lives have not mattered. All such moves, of course, show how stuck in complementarity we have been. That is, the complementarity of doer and done to. But historically, there's been a dangerous self-righteousness involved in exposing the big doers. And what I'm advocating here is a moral third, based on my own rather small but significant experience with reconciliation processes in which there is a way of harming and repairing the ideal organization of the social whole. We might say there's an intrinsic relationship between accepting the third of acknowledging harming. Now here's my other key point. It has to do with understanding the nature of the social system. And accepting the necessity of conflict around how to create a just society that meets the needs of the many. So in the United States, it seems vital to begin a national truth and reconciliation conversation. A conversation about new ways to frankly acknowledge the history of harming and oppression while envisioning repair. I believe that that vision of repair must include the idea of legitimate social conflict. That is to say, the kind of conflict that would hold in check, the unmitigated power of profit and exploitation. So I believe that legitimizing that social class struggle is extremely important to legitimizing the idea that everyone has a right to live, that everyone can live. So I believe we must oppose inequality and injustice even as we simultaneously, radically, and insistently maintain the third, the principle that everyone has a right to live, not by exploiting, oppressing, or harming others, but by acknowledging the vitality and the fruitfulness of certain kinds of democratic conflict. No doubt we might well argue about how much and what constitutes adequate repair, yet we can continue to try to overcome the dissociation and denial that cause harm. Thank you.